My history, I grew up in New Jersey and in a subdevelopment that was built on an old apple orchard, and I think I probably have a lot of arsenic and lead in my blood from digging in the dirt there. But for some reason, I was always interested in agriculture, and when I was a little kid, I used to wake up early and I would watch these farm shows on TV for some strange reason. And when I got done with high school, I was just really sick of school, and I had a cousin who had moved to Virginia and become a hippie and was on a farm, and I went down to visit with him, and I just stayed. And we had a great time working together. We started literally on the ground floor in apple orchards, picking up the prunings after the skilled pruners had trimmed the trees, and we would pile them in the middle of the rows, and Peter knows how that goes. And then they come through with a brush hog, is what's called this mower on the back of a tractor, and they tear all that stuff up and spit the shards of the trimmings everywhere. And then graduated eventually to managing an orchard, and then got super interested in the bugs aspect. And this was in the late 70s. Organic was really starting to get going. And I convinced the owner of this 40-acre orchard to let me do it without conventional pesticides, just kind of out of the blue. And we had a great year, and he made money for the first time ever. I was selling the apples as no-spray apples in the DC, Baltimore area, direct to stores. But by the end of the year, I was pulling my hair out, and I had no confidence that I could repeat the experience. So we had taken this orchard that had been kept sterile by calendar-based applications of pesticides and took it cold turkey off of pesticides. And we had a good cushion because there were no resident populations built up in the orchard. But by the end of the season, I could see stuff happening like mites and apple maggot that were easy to toss out of the crop then, but I said, there's no way that I could pull this off a second year in a row. And so at that point, I decided to go back to school, had 2 kids, 2 mouths to feed, was having some health problems with arthritis at that young age, and went to University of Massachusetts. And wouldn't you know it, 1978, UMass got one of the first big federal grants to start an IPM program for apples. And I just happened to land there and met with Ron Prokopi. Some of you might have heard that name, but he was an amazing guy, a great extension professor, teaching professor, and research person. And we hit it off right away, and I ended up working with him as undergrad scout in the Apple program, and then as an extension technician for a couple of years, and then as a master's student and Ph.D. student. And so did a lot of work with Ron. He had developed this apple maggot trap, which was a red croquet ball that you hang in an apple tree, and you cover it with clear sticky material. And if you're not catching any flies, you don't spray. And I started making those in my basement, and then ended up selling them through gardening catalogs, and it turned into a $500,000 business by the time I finished grad school. And it was just super effective for home backyard orchardists. You wouldn't have to spray. You'd put enough traps in the trees to trap out all the flies. And then the commercial guys would use just 1 trap per 5 acres, and it would tell them whether the flies were out or not. And these were flies that would emerge from the ground in June through August. If it was a dry summer, they wouldn't be able to emerge through the soil. And so some growers at that point were spraying, June through harvest essentially for these things. And by using the trap, sometimes you could delay sprays for 2 months. And I remember one of my first customers was Harry Ricker in Maine, who Peter still works with. And he came up to me at this trade show where I was displaying my wares, and he said, "Tom, your apple trap saved me $40,000 last summer." And my first thought was, geez, I'm not charging enough for these traps. And my second thought was, I'm glad they worked, because if they didn't, he could be coming up to me and say, you cost me, $1 million in crop last year because my apples were all infested with apple maggot. So anyway, it was a great product. Ron and I developed some other products together that are still out there on the market. And then I sold that business in 1995 to a company called Gempler's, based in Wisconsin. Moved from Massachusetts to Wisconsin to help them get trained on the product line. Hated having a boss. It was impossible for me to work for somebody who could tell me, no, I can't do that. And so in 1998, I left and started the IPM Institute. And my idea there was, organic is going great guns, and people really respond to the organic label. And why can't we do that for IPM? And so the idea was we were going to certify IPM growers and get them some recognition in the marketplace. And we learned a lot, including that IPM as a logo really wasn't going to work. Cornell had started in the early 90s a program with standards and ability to get this IPM credential, and it really didn't fly. But we started to work with groups like Rainforest Alliance and Food Alliance that were marketing a number of attributes to consumers, and including pesticide risk reduction and IPM. And that started to take off. And then we started working with Cisco, which is having a conference of their suppliers on Thursday associated with our conference here. And working with their growers in their supply chain, identifying opportunities to eliminate high-risk pesticide uses in their operations, and then targeting those, and then being able to contribute to Cisco's annual sustainability report with numbers like pounds of pesticide use reduced, and acres with IPM practices. And at the same time, all this stuff started happening with school districts, where in Wisconsin, this nonprofit did a survey of our school districts, and a number of the school districts were just happy to report that they were still using diazinon and organophosphates like chlorpyrifos, Dursban, I think was a trade name. Even those things had been banned for structural use, for 5 years. But, the custodians were applying the pesticides. Somebody had bought them, years before when they still had a label for structural use, and they're sitting in the storeroom, and these guys are still going out there and doing, calendar-based spraying of baseboards in the school districts with this stuff. And so at that point, I started looking at the structural arena, and we developed the IPM STAR certification program for schools, where schools would get evaluated, on-site evaluation, and if they met standards, they could get certified. And then that grew into Green Shield for pest control companies and facilities. So that's the history, and I probably spent too much time on that. So now what I want to do is talk about what I did after I retired. So when I retired from the Institute in 2020, my wife was about 3 years away from retirement. I was twiddling my thumbs. One of my consulting clients in town, this multifamily housing, said, we can't get good service here. You've worked with us. We went through 2 companies. We still have 1/3 of our units with cockroaches and 1/3 of them with mice. You're not working now. Why don't you just come and do our pest control while you're waiting for your wife to retire? Well, I did, and then they started referring me to other potential customers, and now I've got about a base of 150 customers that's just spinning off lots of referrals. I don't advertise, but this last fall I was working 7 days a week, 10-hour days, trying to get my work done so that I could go sailing in the Caribbean, which is what I do in the winter as much as I possibly can, and which is why I wear these funny glasses, because my regular glasses are rolling around the bottom of the Caribbean somewhere. They fell off while I was on the boat last week in St. Lucia. So anyway, a couple of things I wanted to do with my business was leave no pesticide behind. I wanted to use pesticides as I needed to, only until the pest problem was over, and then I didn't want to leave any residues behind. So that was one of the things. And number two was, I wanted to see if I could do it without any rodenticide. I did a presentation at a conference in New York, I don't know, 10 years ago, when there was all this rumbling about California was going to ban rodenticides and how terrible it was going to be. And I got interviewed, and somebody asked me that question, and I'm like, oh my God, no, there's no way that we're not going to manage rodents without rodenticide. They're not going to be able to ban it. It's just impossible. So I wanted to kind of test that theory, and now I've been 5 years with no rodenticides, and so that's what I'll talk about first. So in Madison, you know, it's a state capital, university community, lots of highly educated people there. Lots of people living with mice long-term, and there's no company in Madison that offers anything other than a rodenticide program. Yeah, $1,000 a year, every 3 months we'll come out and replace the poison. And so these people don't want the poison because they have pets, they know about wildlife concerns, they have kids, and they're just putting up with mice. So they wake up in the morning, first thing they do is go down and clean the mouse droppings off the kitchen counter. And so just in my own neighborhood, right around the street, there's a small street, and one house after another, I got these people as customers to eliminate their mouse problems. And it's easy to do. There's got to be a hole for them to get in. You got to find the hole, you got to close it up, problem's over. So this is my approach. When I show up, I got two tools in my hand, flashlight and this screwdriver. I have one of these inspection tools too, which is really cool. And it's a good training tool, but if you drop it, it's hard to find. It doesn't reach deep enough, you know, for what I want to explore. And so I use this screwdriver. It's got a bright handle. I can find it when I drop it. And then I can see how far that hole goes in. And so I'll walk around the house with the homeowner, and they'll say, well, what about the holes inside? I say, I don't care about the holes inside. I care about the holes outside to the inside. And that's what I focus on. So I show them, okay, well, this is what we got to do to fix the problem. You know, I give them an estimate, but I charge by the hour, and they pay me, you know, how many hours it takes. And sometimes the estimates are not good because you run into a problem. You run into something where it's very extensive to try to resolve. One of my first customers, and this has very frequently happened since, they had a front porch winterized, and the carpenters, and that little short crawl space underneath that front porch that had no foundation on it, just had pillars. Between that crawl space and the house, there was this 3-foot long gap that was an inch high where you could see the insulation. You know, you had to get down on your belly and squeeze under that porch, but that's where the mice were getting in. And the guy worked in the basement, and the house just reeked like mice. I trapped 55 mice in that house, from basement to attic. And that was one of the situations where every morning I'd get up, wipe the droppings off the counter. So what I do is I start out by trapping, and I trap inside and out. And I use these traps exclusively. It's a really nice, very durable cover outside. It keeps the possums from hauling your traps away. I will stake this to the ground. You know, I'll have a big zip tie and a metal stake, and I'll wrap this box and I'll stake it outside, and I bait it, and I'll put, you know, 5 to 6 of these boxes, so that's 10 to 12 traps on the outside of every house when I start a mouse job. Same manufacturer, and this is the rat version. I use these two for rats. I do some rat work, but it's mostly mouse work with my residential customers. Inside, I put the traps, use the same brand of trap, and I put them in these cardboard boxes. So it makes it much less unpleasant, you know, to have these boxes in the house. And I put them in places, you know, behind the the washing machine in the basement where pets can't get to them because, cats could potentially stick their fingers in there. I always use 2 traps side by side because then you almost always kill that mouse. Otherwise, you use 1 trap, maybe 9 times out of 10, you kill the mouse, and that 10th time that mouse is flopping around all night and waking up your customer, and then they're calling you in the middle of the night. There's something screaming in the basement, or in a school situation. So the traps go like this, side by side. The first trap snaps the mouse. If it's not dead and flops around, the second one is going to get it, 99% of the time. And then you put the box up against the wall so that this, the travel route is right up against the wall. Really works well. Same company makes the rat size trap box too, but I rarely have to deal with rats inside the house. It's usually outside. I always wear knee pads. I'm 70 years old. I still got my original knees. Always wear knee pads. These are like $9. I go through a lot of them, but I really like them. If you're working in a wet environment, it keeps your knees dry because of the plastic thing. But wear knee pads. Wear knee pads. You'll thank yourself when you're 70. Okay, and then what I use in terms of sealing up holes, I'll do carpentry, I'll do masonry, I do a lot of sheet metal work too, and often the holes are that seam between the foundation and the siding. And I use a lot of this material. It's steel wool, but it's stainless. So it doesn't rust, it doesn't stain, it doesn't break down, it stays forever. And you can cram it into any size space. The company offers lots of different versions of this, and they're in the trade show. You can go and see them. I use the 1-inch strips and the 2-inch blocks. That's all I buy, and I buy a lot of it. And it's expensive, and I charge my customers the cost plus 20%. And that works well. Sometimes I get into a situation where, a lot of times I get into a situation where somebody's been using a company for rodenticide program, and you show up at the house and it really stinks like dead mice because they've died in the walls from the rodenticide. And you use this product, and I'm happy to share, afterwards trade names for any of this, but it's an odor eliminator, and you just put a little bit on a cotton ball and you stick it near the source of the odor. And even if the odor's coming from inside the wall, if you can get that cotton ball, stuck under the baseboard or something in that area, it just dissipates the odor entirely. So it really works well. So one of the things I do is, in Madison, in Wisconsin, they allow builders to put foam foundation on the foam insulation on the outside of foundations. So they put this, 1-inch or 1.5-inch or 2-inch foam board on the outside of the concrete foundation because it's much cheaper and quicker to do it on the outside than to do it on the inside where you got all the stud work and everything else to work around. And it's absolutely ridiculous. And then they coat it with this stucco paint, essentially. It's like a concrete mix. And the mice chew right through it. They get into that foam and they chew up and they get up under the siding and get into the house. And you'll drive through Madison and you'll see this brand new development like a year in, and you'll see all these pink spots on the foundation. What the hell is that? And you walk up there and those are the spots where the mice have chewed through the stucco to get into the foam. And it's unbelievable. And so then what I do in those situations, I use it's a material called trim coil, but you can get it in different colors, and it comes in a 50-foot roll by 24 inches, and I'll cover the whole foundation, all that foam, with this stuff. And I use some metal shears to cut it, and we tuck it up underneath the siding in most cases, and we bury it 6 inches. So we trench all around the foundation, go down 6 inches with this stuff, and then we'll glue it to the foundation, screw it to the foundation, and then we also just pin it against the foundation with gravel. So when we trench out 6 inches down and 4 inches out, we haul away that dirt, and then we fill that trench back in with pea gravel. And it keeps it nice and dry. And then you have this mowing strip around the foundation so you don't have weeds growing up against the house. And rodents don't like to dig in pea gravel. Why? Because they dig and the pea gravel collapses down around them. Got it, Peter. So that's the rodent program. My average invoice is over $800. And it's mostly because of these bigger jobs where it might be $4,000 or $5,000 to do that foundation remediation with the trim coil aluminum. So, other tools, door sweeps. I do a lot of garage door sweeps. Again, this is the company that's in the trade show. Really nice rodent-proof door sweeps that are easy to install, easy to adapt to any garage door. They have different sizes. Regular entry doors, sweeps, rodent-proof, stainless steel mesh, impregnated into the rubber. Works really super well. I go through a lot of sealant, both inside and outside. My multifamily housing community just rebuilt everything, and I spend about 3 hours in every unit after the builders are done, before the residents move in, sealing up every single gap and crevice that I can find. Use a lot of this stuff. When I'm doing this, I've got a bag and I've got 4 of these guns. I've got 2 white and 2 clear, and I've got 2 different size cuts at the end of the tip for big gaps and for little gaps, and it makes it really efficient. You just drag that thing behind you, and you got the tool that you need to match up with whatever the color you need and whatever application width you need. These are flea traps. They have a bulb in them, so you plug them in, and it has a sticky liner in there. They're great. I really want to see what they might do with the mice, because you can take this cover off and maybe set the cover up next to the trap or something. See whether that would attract. But bed bugs, fleas, works amazingly. A couple more things I'll show you, and maybe afterwards I'll just hang out, and if you want to see any of this stuff, I can talk to you about it. I was talking to Carlos about this at lunchtime, and this is an ant bait trap that is just amazing. So it's the same company that makes these covers and the snap traps that I use. And the top comes off. It's got 2 chambers in there. You can put a granular bait and a liquid bait, and it preserves that stuff. So now, I've got a child care center that's built on, an ant mound, and just impossible to keep ants out. And once a month during the summer, I'll go and replenish the bait. And usually after 2 or 3 months, by June, there's no more ant activity for the season, and I can stop doing it. It's almost like a calendar-based approach, but I'm using much less insecticide than I would otherwise. Okay, so that's about it. What I'm going to do is pass around a couple of things. So these are monitors that I use. These are my preferred monitors. I use these exclusively. They're cheap, they're super effective, but there's interesting things going on with these that you usually don't see in monitors. So I wanted to pass these around, and then we can ask maybe at the break, who knows what's going on with them. So go ahead and take a look and then pass them on. So I got some bed bug traps out here. Oh, this is another great tool. Home Depot, cost $1 a piece. It's a plastic escutcheon plate that fits perfectly around sink drains. And it already has a seam in it, that you can just snap. And so you can put it on existing pipe. And it fits tightly. You can use a little sealant around it too, but it just closes that gap in so much less time than if you're trying to futz around with sealant and stainless mesh or whatever. Okay, so I'll stop there.
What's while everything's fresh in people's mind, let's take 1 or 2 questions if anyone has any.
For the ant traps, are those just for Argentine, or what kind of, is it specific ants you're targeting, or you're just?
So in Wisconsin, we have pavement and odorous house and farrow. So it's really pavement and odorous house that I'm treating outside with these outdoor, long-lasting bait stations, and it eliminates the need to use the insecticide inside. And I still do a lot of sealing to try to keep them out, but it's next to impossible. And they'll chew through sealant. You can seal it really well. I know that thing is sealed, and then you come back next time and there's this little pinhole that they chewed through it. Yeah. Yeah.
Can I address that though? Because we have a lot of Argentinians in California. So if you use the right bait for the bait holder, then you'll, just make sure you identify your hand and then use the bait that they like.
Yeah, and you have to experiment with baits too, because what they like on one day isn't necessarily what they like on the next day. And, yeah, Carlos.
I wouldn't use that bait station at a school, just because you can't really lock down and anchor it. So we found that kids will kick it, or you can still pick it up and remove it. So here we prefer to lock things down and almost bolt them down to the ground, and it has to be lock and key. So we use other styles for California schools, but for residentials, I use that quite a bit. I think it works very well, very effective for the Argentina.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So I've been using it with daycare centers where they have very limited areas where the kids are allowed, and I put them in the areas where the kids can't get to them. And at schools and high schools and so forth, it's just it's next to impossible to put anything that's movable anywhere outside, because the kids will get to it. Oh, the last thing I wanted to mention was I use the carbon dioxide system for rodent burrows. And that's how with the trapping, I use live traps, I use the snap traps in these boxes, and I use the burrow treatment, the CO2, and that's how I'm able to resolve rat problems. And I take an area-wide approach with that. So if somebody calls me with a rat problem, and it's often the health department that's calling me and saying, hey, we got a problem over here, look at this address, I'll go door to door and offer a free inspection, and then I'll give a quote to the customer if they have any rat issues on their property, and 9 times out of 10 they don't. But you have to find the source of the rats, or they'll just keep coming back. If you just do one property at a time, they'll just keep coming back. You really need to look at the whole neighborhood. And often I get mouse jobs going door to door. Well, you don't have any rat problems. Well, do you do mice? I've been with mice for 10 years in this house. I know we use rodenticides, and every time I call somebody, they say rodenticides is all they do. So it really works. Yeah?
I'm curious about the technique of creating like a pea gravel moat around the base of foundation of the house. And we have trouble with ground squirrels compromising the foundation of homes that are built in open spaces. And I'm wondering if the pea gravel moat approach might fortify that foundation better and not get rid of the ground squirrels, but at least insulate the foundation from damage.
I think the pea gravel alone, it works well for mice and shrews. We also have shrews digging into that foam. But rats will just scatter the pea gravel. They're strong enough, and I wonder if ground squirrels would do that as well. So it definitely discourages mice, but not necessarily rats.